Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 279 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is Make Every Day Count. I'm not sure who is actually credited with this quote, but I think it fits today's episode perfectly. Make today count, you'll never get it back. Before we jump into today's episode, I would like to remind everybody about our third We Rise by Lifting Others Up forum, which is titled The Power of Positivity, which is coming up on Wednesday, July 22nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Information as well as the registration link can be found on our Instagram account. And I also have some exciting news. My first book that I wrote with Chris Wilberting, titled The Positivity Tribe, will be pre-launching very soon. But now, let's jump into today's episode. It is both an honor and a privilege to bring you today's episode. I initially connected with our guest on Instagram, and I absolutely love his no-quit story. A 20-year prison sentence would cripple most people, but Rob Grupe decided to change his life for the better. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Rob, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Man, I'm pumped to be here.
I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Dude, I'm ready, man. Let's do it.
Awesome. So you have quite an interesting no-quit story of your own, and I was curious if you wouldn't mind sharing it with our listeners today.
Yeah, so where to begin on that one? So I was a fat kid growing up and had a pretty humiliating experience happen to me when I was about probably 12 years old. Got beat up on my front porch by some older boys, and one of them punched me, one of them spit in my face. And, when you're in a situation like that, that fight or flight kind of kicks in. And I found myself, instead of fighting, just like pleading, like, please stop, I'm sorry. And it passed, and I went back in the house, and I just remember I was just so humiliated. I was so upset, at myself. Like, I just felt like a little bee, right? Like, why didn't I do something, And, I never wanted to feel that way again. So around that same time, my dad had introduced me to bodybuilding, and I had some weights, and I started working out and just started really checking out everything Arnold. And I just poured myself into that. I wanted to become the strongest version of myself. I wanted to never feel like that again. I wanted to help other people not feel like that either. So that started my journey into bodybuilding, and, changed my life. It improved my confidence. And it gave me meaning, gave me identity, and that was the path that I was on. And then along the way, things got sidetracked. I got into dealing drugs, and I hurt my back. I had a lower back injury, and deadlifting, and that caused an addiction to painkillers that got completely out of control. At one point, I was taking 800 milligrams of Oxycontin a day. So that was a very expensive habit, and that turned to me going to a methadone clinic. Ultimately, drug use got worse. I got to the point at my worst where I was shooting cocaine 15 times a day. And what brought all of that to an end was I fell asleep at the wheel, woke up to the police pulling me out of my vehicle, and I had drugs and a gun on me. Like, that's how out of control life had gotten. I literally was at a stoplight. My foot stayed on the brake somehow, and there's no telling how many cycles the light went through before the police got there, pulled me out of my vehicle. And just the fact that I didn't kill somebody else, float into the intersection, it was just a miracle. And so I woke up to the police pulling me out of my vehicle. I had to go to court, had an attorney that was like, oh man, first offense, no big deal. You get some probation, something like that. And it didn't work that way. They ended up giving me a 20-year prison sentence. And so that day in court, as they start cuffing me up, my family's crying, it just got real in that moment. And it was just like, okay, like, this is the reality of it. And it made me upset at the same time, like knowing if had I not fallen asleep and woken up to the police pulling me out of my vehicle, I would be dead for sure. I was on just such a destructive path. Nothing was stopping me other than death. And so I made a decision that day in the courtroom that I was going to change my life, and I was going to make every day count. There wouldn't be one day that I could look back on and think, oh man, why didn't I use this time more efficiently? And so that was the mindset that I went into it with. Like, I didn't, play victim, like, oh man, why? It was just like, all right, the lifestyle I was leading, the choices I made led up to this result, whether it was a first offense or not. Here I am. I've got to make every day count. So there's no reason on the back end of this thing that I can look back and ask, why didn't I use my time more efficiently? So in there, man, when I first got into like medium/maximum security prison, I'm like asking myself, okay, like what led up to this? How can I not do that again? And what do I need to do with my life now? And I sought out like drug treatment programs in there, but they wouldn't let me do it because I had too many days on my sentence. Where I'm seeing people forced into the program, I wanted to do it. I wanted that, and they wouldn't let me. So I just took it upon myself to just pour into books, everything that I could, again, make an everyday count to find the answers to those questions. What led up to it? How can I not do that again? How can I make a difference? And knowing like my passion was training, so I got back into that, just put myself on a routine I created for myself and just did it. Boom, boom, boom. And then I also knew I wanted to get into counseling. So I spent 7 years, 6 months, and 18 days locked up. Not that I kept track or anything, right? But as horrible as some of that time was, I wouldn't change it for anything, because it gave me the contrast. It gave me the appreciation for life and opportunity that I wouldn't otherwise have. The nights that I would just lay there in my cell, staring at a spot on the wall or the ceiling and thinking like, man, I can't freaking wait until I can just get out there and have the opportunity to struggle, barely get by, grinding it out, living paycheck to paycheck. Just let me get that. Made me appreciate things, gave me a get to mindset rather than a have to mindset.
Well, you touched on like 600 things, and I really appreciate
I told you I'll go all over the place. You got to reel me in, man.
No, it's an amazing story. So the first question I have is, and not having experienced prison myself, so I don't want to say this from a perspective of experiencing it, but I do know that many people within the prison system, statistics show that they go back and they stay within the system. And how is it that you were able to make that decision in court when you said, I'm not going to play victim and I'm going to choose to make a choice right now and change my life? How is it that you were able to do that? And then more importantly, was there one specific thing during those 7+ years that really kept you grounded?
I mean, I just knew there was just a certainty that came over me in that moment, that I just knew, like, I will not let this define me. I'm going to show everybody, myself included, that this will not define me. I will rise above this. I will make the best of this. I will come out stronger than ever on the other side of it. And so when I went in, that environment's a predatory environment. I had to put on and take on a persona of, like, don't talk to me, don't mess with me. So any place I was at, I would just talk to a very select few people. I was very selective of who I talked to, who I interacted with. And I would make that distinction based off of asking somebody like, hey, what's your plan? What are you going to do? And, the common answer, when I get out, I'm going to, do this and that, get back on my feet and da-da-da. And I'm like, all right, well, why don't you just stay here? Save yourself some time. So, I mean, I took, like, the only people that I would interact with are people that had like goals, people that had goals. So it was interesting for sure.
So you mentioned getting into books. Was there one book in particular that really led you down a path, or was it just a bunch of them altogether?
It was a bunch of them, but I can remember I read probably 1,000 books. I read Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and I can remember a part in there just reading it and just thinking, wow, like I didn't know thoughts could be put into words like this.
Did you say 1,000 books, by the way?
Probably 1,000 books. Yeah.
Well, and since you've been out, have you continued with your reading?
Definitely. I mean, I obviously don't read as much, not the same amount of free time, but I always start my morning off with some reading. Absolutely. So every day.
You teed up that question we ask every guest is, I was curious if you have a morning routine that you swear by.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll get up, I start reading from whatever book I'm on at the time. So I get up, start coffee, let the dog out, and I write a note to my fiance. I write her a little love note every single morning. It's just part of my morning routine. I write her a note, get her coffee ready for her. I get up a few hours before she does, and then I go and I start reading, and then I have like a little morning routine of some affirmations that I say just to kick my morning off, some I am statements, and then I'll start work.
I love it. I'm a big believer of affirmations, and I think it's interesting because a lot of people look at it as that hokey kind of like, I'm amazing, everything's perfect. But I think when you take it and it's specific to I am fill in the blank, I am working on this, I'm a better version of that. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. So speaking of books, I wanted to ask if you're reading anything currently right now, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Oh man, anything Brian Tracy. I love his stuff.
Have you read his book? I assume you have goals.
Yes.
It's one of my all-time favorite books.
Yeah, I think I have that one around here somewhere.
So the idea, make every day count. I think sports and business and life, there's similar sayings, and I think they all mean the same thing. Was that something that you've had growing up in your entire life, or was it more something along the lines that came about during that time in the courthouse when you said, you know what, I'm making this change for myself first and foremost?
Well, I mean, part of this, and this just made me think, this ties into like my why of what drives me now, is that I am an influential person, have been for as long as I can remember. And there was a time in my life that I negatively influenced myself, but I also negatively influenced other people, some of them no longer living, and I can't change it. But what I get to do now is make a difference every day moving forward. So before, I was driven, from the point of being the fat kid that got beat up and not wanting to feel that way and not wanting other people to feel that way. So helping people with fitness, even before any of that. And then, that day in court just like turned it around. Like, I can't do anything about the past now. It's done, but I can make a difference every day moving forward. And so just reflecting on that always just gets me freaking juiced and gets me back in the game, and gets me excited to work on things every day. Gets me freaking excited to wake up and build stuff, knowing that I'm going to be working with people, helping people, making an impact.
I love that. And I think that's really key. What you just touched on is focusing on what you can impact, the people you can influence now, and not focusing on the past. And I don't think in any way it means you don't think about the past, obviously, or just snap your fingers and say, oh, well, it's done. But I think so many people focus on the past and what's happened to them and over-focus and they overanalyze as opposed to living in the moment. And I think that's relationships, business, whether it's kids, parents, grandkids. So I'm really glad that you touched on that, because I think it's something that's really important. I wanted to change lanes for a minute and ask you about your fitness business, because you've now taken it from a brick and mortar into an online perspective. And I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I work with busy professionals just to help them learn how to eat in a way that's not restrictive, and show them through data versus emotion how to do that. just really trying to simplify everything, just teaching people a skill set, that once you have the skills to know how to look at those things, you can implement whatever diet you want within a knowledge base. So teaching people skills to be able to look at data, and ultimately helping people look better naked. That's what everybody wants, right? But yeah, just really empowering people with the knowledge to get the result that they want, and help them to become the strongest, most resilient version of themselves. So nutrition is a big component, but also the psychology is a big component of it, because just touching on, we're talking about affirmations. We have a narrative going on in our mind. We have it. It's going on, whether you want to address it or not, and it's telling you something. And most of the time, it's saying something negative. So when we can take conscious control, bring awareness to the fact that that's happening, and then we start to control the narrative, and we start breaking beliefs whenever somebody identifies as, I'm the overweight person, I'm not a morning person, then you do things that reinforce the things that you're saying. So we get to change the narrative, change the identity of the person. So it's not like I'm going on this diet. You go on a diet, you're going to go off a diet. It's we learn new skills and tools to step into the identity that we want to create for ourselves.
I think that's remarkable that you just shared that. I don't think I've heard it that way, in the sense of going on and off on a diet. And I think so many people know, I'm sure many of our listeners know people that have lost and gained a ton of weight. And so many people lose weight and they end up gaining more weight. And the way you described it, I think is remarkable. It's learning a new skill. It's learning how to eat differently, learning how to understand it versus going on and off a diet. And I think in our society today, so many of us look at different things and it's that quick fix. So it's like, all right, lose 10 pounds in a day. And the reality is not a single person that you and I look up to, whether it's business, fitness, has ever achieved that success overnight. And I'm sure you and I have read and watched a lot of the same videos and things, and people will jokingly say, yeah, I was an overnight success. It took me 10 years overnight, or it took 12 years. And I think that's what's powerful. And I think that's why you've been successful in your business, because it's not about giving somebody that quick skill, that quick fix. It's about teaching somebody and giving them the tools, giving them the skills, so then they can continue to do it themselves. So I think that's really interesting. I wanted to ask you, what does the word accountability mean to you?
Accountability is like it's calling people out, not being afraid to say the things. Like, this is a really big eye opener for me that I learned in the last year or so. Whenever I'm having a conversation with somebody, like a breakthrough conversation with somebody that's given me permission to coach them, it's bringing to the surface and letting somebody become aware when they're just saying some BS, when they're playing into the story of, my thyroid medication, the kids, and this and that, or whatever it is. That's just an excuse for why they're in the situation that they're in. And if that's left unchecked, it will continue to be an excuse. So a good coach is somebody that tells you the things that you need to hear, not necessarily that you want to hear. And so addressing those things early on, like, hey, I'm not saying this to hurt your feelings, but the thyroid medication doesn't have any calories in it, right? And I'm not saying that to try to be mean. It's just, we got to take 100% responsibility for where we're at right now to take the next steps moving forward.
That's really super key and specific in regards to what you want to hear versus what you need to hear. And I think you said something that really stood out to me, is when somebody gives you permission to coach them. And I think that's very different, because everybody has their opinion. You go online and it's like, oh, do this, do that, this will work, as opposed to when somebody really invests in you. And the flip side is you invest in them. So I'm really glad that you shared that. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, this is a question that I've got asked a lot of times. And I love that you asked me this question, because the more I thought about that, when someone would ask me that, going back to the version of me that thought that I knew everything, no, you couldn't tell me anything. So I wouldn't tell that person anything. I would ask that person questions. So to be able to influence anybody, you must first know what's already influencing them, right? So I would have dug and asked, and that is the only way I can think of that somebody could have gotten to me then.
I love that. It's like a famous quote that John C. Maxwell says is good leaders ask great questions. And I think that's amazing. Nobody has actually said it that way. And I know for a fact the 20-year-old version myself, probably similar to the 20-year-old version you described, I think I knew it all. I had all the answers. But if I were to ask myself some questions, that'd be different. And that'd be interesting to see how I would have answered them. If I could give you the opportunity to have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick and why?
And probably Tony Robbins. The reason is one of the deals I made with myself when I was locked up is I am going to take advantage of opportunities. I'm going to do stuff that scares me. I'm just going to do it. So I've invested in a lot of coaching, and I've been to every Tony Robbins event, and it definitely changed my life, just as far as like my beliefs, my mantra, like just the training that you go into. He, through his programs, just showed me like how far you can go mentally and psychologically. Like when you think you have nothing left, you have another level. And so I would love to sit there and just have that. And like one of the things like I love about coaching, I love about meeting people, I love about connecting with people that operate on a higher playing field than me, is because I'm always searching, like, what is that question that they have that I don't know about, that I can ask myself? What is the blind spot that I have right now? I don't even know, I'm not aware of. And it's only, through being around people that are like that raises your level of awareness when you start to see those things you've never seen before and become aware of them. So yeah, that answers your question.
No, I think the way you described it it's really key, because that's why people get to that next levels. They level up and they're always looking and always willing to learn. And how you describe that blind spot, I think is really unique, because that's how you take it from a high level of success to just a hugely impactful level of really being pushed, and all of a sudden you don't know you have a blind spot. So how can you fix it, or how can you address it if you don't know you have it? So I think that's remarkable. So we're going to switch over to what we call our hot seat questions, and the only request we have of you is that you spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Cool.
You get one cheat meal. You can absolutely pick anything. What do you pick?
Probably cereal.
What kind?
Oh man, probably Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
I'm gonna show you the fat me growing up. Is I'm gonna have cereal, Cookie Crisp with chocolate milk. All-time favorite smell?
Probably the smell of like gym smell. Not like gross gym smell, but like equipment smell.
Favorite sport?
I'm not huge into sports, but if I do, then it's probably like watching MMA stuff, UFC, stuff like that.
Favorite movie?
Probably Goodfellas would be up there for sure.
Good movie. All-time favorite quote?
So I have a few of those. Like I listened to your show before, so I have one that I wrote myself. That still speaks to me. Wrote this when I was locked up, that I will continually search for the books, scriptures, people, places, concepts, experiences, conversations, music, and locations that forever change my way of thinking, give me strength, desire, perseverance, and motivation, or open my eyes to something that's always been there, yet I see it at that point for the first time.
That's an awesome quote. Do you have an all-time favorite book?
On that one, it just probably anything Brian Tracy, like his stuff, second to Tony Robbins. Brian Tracy's work is amazing. I use his quotes all the time. His laws that he has, I pour into those all the time. I love it. That's another person I would love to meet.
You're on top of a cliff. Brian Tracy is on your left and Tony Robbins is on your right. You can only pick one to save. Who do you save?
Oh man, I would probably have to save Brian Tracy. He's older. He's older.
He's a lot smaller also.
Yeah.
Favorite singer, group, or band?
Man, that's a good one. Like for me, and like I'm gonna say Hatebreed, and that's weird. Like Hatebreed's like a hardcore metal band, and Jamie Jasta is the lead singer there. And I say that because like one of the things that really fed my mind when I was locked up was lyrics from music. And so this is like a hardcore metal band, and I don't like all the songs, but like some of them just really spoke to me. Like there's a line that I have from, he has an album, I think it's called Perseverance. And so like the things that he said, I would sing to myself, and what they were is affirmations, and I didn't realize it until later on. But one line that he has in there, give all yourself that there is to give, because in life to have never risked is to have never lived. And so I took like little pieces like that, man, and it just fed my mind. So I actually reached out to him not too long ago on Instagram and just told him, that his music really inspired me, and told him a little bit about my story. And he answered like right away. I was like, dude, that's really cool. And so I thought that was cool.
That is awesome. And if you were stuck in a foxhole, you could only have one person to have your back. Who would it be?
It'd be my fiance, my ride or die.
Awesome. So question I have for you is, I was curious, is there someone on social media that you follow that really inspires you and motivates you?
Man, I have a lot, man. I have a lot of coaches and mentors that it's all just kind of bled together, honestly. Like there's not any one I can think of.
You're supposed to say me, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's right, of course.
And then last question for you in regards to our listeners wanting to find out more about you or follow you. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
So you can find me on Facebook or Instagram, Rob Grupe. Last name is Grupe. In both my Instagram and Facebook, I have a questionnaire in the bio. And just by completing that questionnaire gives you an invite to my free Facebook group that I share a ton of content. I do every Monday, I do a Mindset Monday post where I just go over some content to help people get their week started off right. So those would be the two main spots, Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. And then last question we ask each guest is if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
That reality is truly perception, that, every day is a gift. Every obstacle, every challenge is a gift. That is only through the contrast of going through difficult situations in your life that you truly appreciate the feeling of winning, the feeling of when just everything comes together. If you've never struggled before, you won't have the kind of appreciation for that. And then don't be afraid to fail. Like fail fast, fail hard, fail often. On the other side of your fear is your success. So embrace the failure, embrace the difficult conversations.
I love
on
it.
the other side.
I love it. I think so many people look at failure the wrong way, so I'm really glad that you ended it that way. And I have to say, I just appreciate what you shared with us, and I know it'll help a bunch of listeners. So I highly recommend our listeners to check you out, not only on Instagram, but also on Facebook. And I hope that you and I can connect again soon.
For sure, man. Appreciate you having me on here. I really do.
Thank you for listening to episode number 279. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to connect and become friends with Rob. The concept of get to versus have to is something that I think most people don't fully appreciate or understand, myself included. Rob's parting words are absolutely spot on. Every day is a gift. Every obstacle is also a gift. And most importantly, don't be afraid to fail. So my challenge today is just that. As you go about your morning, afternoon, or evening, if and when you fail, embrace it, learn from it, and use it to become a better version of you. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.